Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Express Technical Committee meeting of October the 19th. Joining in is Yapa, Rand, and Doug. We don't really have much of an agenda for today's meeting, so we'll jump right into anything that is kind of going on. So I know if Rand, if you have anything.
Yeah, I may have one, some minor point things to talk about. Nothing major, but yeah.
Cool. What is it?
Oh, okay. Let's see. At one point, there was an issue that came up about Pug, and actually there's an open PR in the docs to replace Jade everywhere with Pug, and the problem is that the generator still hasn't been changed to use Pug. Which I don't know if it's a huge deal. It's a little bit. I basically added something in the docs to say, oh yeah, the generator still uses Jade, which will work fine, but if you want the latest, updates to the generator, then you have to change over to use Pug. And at some point, and I know there is an open issue, or it might even be a PR in the generator repo to make that change. So
yeah, that's actually a great topic. I actually didn't even think about that. So there is an already in fact merged commit to 4.14. In fact, I was just doing some generator work today in a little bit of the time I had earlier. But all it does is add Pug as another option. It didn't even remove Jade. It just added Pug as an additional. So really, to me, I think, so obviously we would add Pug. I mean, that's just, Jade's going to Pug. We of course add Pug. Regardless of what version it is, we'd certainly add it.
Yeah.
No reason not to. So to me, what I think we really should, the real topic here is because if we're going to change from Jade to Pug, by default, right? So that will certainly change the default behavior of the generator. I'm not super concerned with like crazy weird changes to behavior like that, because the generator doesn't actually follow like Semver really. It's hard for a command line to really follow it anyways. I mean, it pretty much is just published with the same version number of Express, with whatever Express it's gonna, pump out at you is all it's doing right now. And I mean, for better or for worse. So it's absolutely possible that I think that probably will obviously have to change the default at some time, I would think, because Jade gets that stupid warning and whatever. So then really, in my mind, the question we would need to discuss, we would want to talk about is, should we change it from Jade to Pug or Jade to something else? And really the only something else is either, in my mind, either EJS or HBS. So it's embedded JavaScript or handlebars. In fact, I actually opened this issue a long time ago on whether or not, this is actually before the TC even existed, was whether or not Jade should be the default.
Yeah.
And at the time we kind of talked about, but really it was kind of like, not really. Doesn't seem like there's really much of a big deal about it, so it was closed. Yeah. So it's actually interesting these days, because not only do we have to move away from Jade, and Pug, though similar to Jade, is a major bump and has slightly different things, plus already they changed the file extension too. So I mean, at that point, it's really just a whole nother really template engine. I would go as far as saying Pug is a new template engine inspired by Jade, rather than it saying it is Jade still, because of the fact it's doing a major version bump with a bunch of changes into it with the name change. And they haven't gone and, like, as far as I know, republished old versions of Jade under the Pug name. So it's really, to me, that's logically how I think of it. So that point, like, we could say, the reason why I say it's interesting is because HBS, which is the node or the Express view wrapper for handlebars, was recently put into the Express.js project, that repo. So it's under the Pillar.js organization in GitHub.
Yep.
So it makes it interesting, because if we're saying, like, maybe we should change it to something else, and if we really think we should change it to something else, like, it might even be beneficial really in just like the long term anyways to potentially change it to HBS, just because we know we won't have this stupid problem, of course. One handles, I mean, HBS is certainly not going to, it's just 3 letters chained together. It's an acronym. So there won't be really this weird trademark thing, which is what happened to Jade. But even then, like, it's actually in the organization too. So it kind of, we have a lot more leeway, especially if say like, for example, in Express 5, like, completely changes the way the view engines have to work. The generator would, as it is today, be completely dependent upon, like, out of the box, it wouldn't even function with the current thing until we waited on, like, Jade, for example, ignoring anything else, but just, like, as an example, Jade to update it, which I'm sure they would do semi-quickly, but, whatever. So, I mean, that's a benefit it would have. Whether or not it's worth it or not, I don't know. But anyways, so that's what I was kind of thinking. Is really the question to me is, should we just change it to something, whether that's Pug or HBS or something else?
Yeah, I mean, I don't, not knowing a lot, frankly, I don't know much about handlebars, but just the fact that it's now sort of under the Express.js org, it does seem like it would be natural to make that the default. I don't know if there's a technical argument one way or the other, to be honest, but just, the fact that we sort of have, i.e. the Express community as a whole, have, in a sense, control over that template engine, it would make sense to make that the default, orthogonal to any other considerations. But
yep, I think so too.
Yeah, and if you ask what the technical things are, I mean, really the only things that come to my mind are Jade, like EJS, and that's why I thought I proposed EJS a long time ago, can be easier for beginners, because you can essentially embed actual, like, JavaScript in it, do logic, which, true, if people were to argue what's a pure MVC separation, it would be, don't do logic in your views. It should be all static data going in there, and you don't make real decisions in there.
Yeah.
Which handles bars, that's what handlebars caters to, right? So that, of course, so that would be the real technical difference, is that Jade caters more towards here's a view engine, but easy to get going with it, while handlebar more is like, here's a view engine, and it's more of a pure view engine of being very having the clearer separation of what a view engine is supposed to do. And of course, you'll have to do whatever to interact with that. Of course, people are always free to choose what engine they're using with a generator. So
yeah,
we're only talking about just the default if they don't specify it.
Right.
Of course, I don't have any, we don't collect any data from people using the generator, of course, so we wouldn't be able to know, like we don't have any telemetry to say, oh, X amount of people use the default versus choose it. Most likely, it would probably be mixed, right? So I know our website essentially uses the default because it doesn't specify it.
No.
But the question would be books. I don't know, and other websites, whether or not that that they included or don't include it. So, yeah. Though some of those books probably might even include install, like npm install Express.js generator at a certain version. So even if they don't include a default, if they do tell people to install some specific version, of course they wouldn't change anyways.
Yeah.
So that's my thoughts. I mean, it sounds like we're kind of like on the same kind of thinking here. So what I'm going to do probably as a takeaway is I'm going to go ahead and probably just go ahead and open an issue on that generator and see the TC, just to let people have a chance, everybody have a chance to kind of chime in before actually polling that. And we'll probably say, unless we hear, if we don't hear like any objections, but I mean, because it's a large change, so I'll probably give it like a week, at least or so, just to get, because it's such a large change, just so everybody has a chance to kind of see it. So what I'll probably do is I'll open it, and then probably if it seems like a bunch of people haven't responded, I'll ping the CC again on probably like Monday or Sunday or something. So that will give a second chance, and then we'll just we'll do it if there's no real objections, and then that's literally, this is the thing. This is what is actually why we still haven't published 4.14, because I really did, because we don't follow Semver, so it's like I kind of wanted to do like a major change like this with like at least what looks like a patch version of the generator. And so at the time, we already knew Jade was dead and needed to be replaced by Pug. At the time, it was like, well, maybe Pug will just release 2.0, we'll just change it, whatever. And then it's just been lagging. They're taking their time for sure.
Yeah.
And I know I've looked through it and used it, and there certainly are a lot of edge case bugs that didn't exist in Jade that were just, popped up from all the refactoring that was done. And I know they are actively fixing it. I think that's probably why it still is an alpha or whatever, just because they're just like us, right? They're trying to find a time to go and like fix it, and they don't necessarily, it feels like, want to necessarily say, yeah, it's 2.0, and they don't feel comfortable. Is kind of like how it seems. I don't know for sure, but I mean that's what I would do if I was in their shoes, and when I read through the issues, is that's how I would feel. So
yeah. So yeah, I mean, obviously I'll keep an eye on the issue, and when we make this change, I'll have to, I'll change the docs obviously to reflect if we do change the default. I don't think it's a huge amount of work in terms of doc updates, but we always would like to have the docs be accurate in terms of what the generator does, since I think especially new users, rely on the generator when they're sort of learning Express and so forth. So.
Yep. Yeah, and you even saw that today. I think that one issue was opened about the start command.
Yeah.
So.
And I'm not sure what the problem was, because I followed the.
Yeah. No. We'll have to. I mean, it's hard. I think some of the users, like that user may have been new to actually just command lines in general. So it's syntactically correct depending on your command line. So it's possible they're using something weird. So certainly finding out will help us figure out what we'll want to change. So, like as you pointed out, right? It does tell you when you run the command, it gives you the instructions.
Yeah.
The biggest difference really is that Windows command line, that command won't work on Windows. It only works on especially like a bash style command line. It may work on some other Linux command lines as well, but certainly it won't work on like cmd.exe, which is that's the other reason why in the generator it actually tells you the command to run. So that way it actually does that detection and hopefully tell them the correct answer.
Yeah. And we added that to the docs a while back as well. So we said on Mac or Linux, you use this command. On Windows, use this command.
Right. So our assumption is that they are on Mac or Linux. That's why they're looking at that one. And so certainly if they say, because they very well may be using some kind of weird shell that it doesn't work on. So that would be certainly interesting to know. I mean, you can't wait forever for them to say, because maybe they might just never reply or something. But we'll see what they say, and we'll make, just like you pointed out, right? We'll want to also make the adjustments to the generator itself, docs and/or even the little thing it shows. So we'll figure that out. But as you see, lots of people do follow the generator thing. So
yeah, for sure. Okay, and there was one other issue. Actually, it was a PR that Linus opened a couple of weeks ago. Here, I can put a link in the chat. It's actually PR number 719 in the doc repo. There it is. And it's been sitting open for a couple of weeks. I commented on it, and basically, I think what he did is he ran ESLint on the example code, and, which is fine. Or I mean, not on the example code, on the code examples in the documentation. So primarily, it did things like removed the semicolon at the end of lines, and which I guess that's our accepted code style. So
yeah.
it's, yeah. So I'm totally fine with that. I guess my, as you can see, my comment was, well, let's see. It's been a couple of weeks now. I'm trying to remember. Do all the examples in the examples, the sort of examples directory, do they follow that as well? Do you know?
So I can comment on this for a little bit. So yep. So we are working on moving things in the Express.js org to the standard style. So in the general sense, this PR makes sense, I guess. If people look at the source code for one thing, they'll see the same thing as the docs. I can definitely tell you the PR itself was not necessarily run through ESLint, because it looks like literally any semicolon anywhere was stripped. I see lots of English semicolons and actual words just changed and removed. So I think it was just a really quick find and replace to do that changes. So it will certainly need to be looked through.
Yeah, I didn't even notice that. That's a good catch.
Yeah, I was just staring at it. But yeah, so to your other question, of course, is that, hey, have we actually changed the examples in the Express repo? So the answer to that, I can definitely tell you today, no. So at the time when we were talking about standard style, we of course had a little bit of a conundrum. So a lot of the repos, which only have a master branch and are linear, right? A lot of them were really easy, right? We changed lots and lots of those. And really the only one that was the issue was Express itself. So typically, we could just go and change it, right? So the problem with doing that, of course, disrupts any existing PRs, because it pretty much will make them all merge issues. That's really easy for us to work to do it by hand. So it's not really a problem. I just point that out, just saying one of the problems, but it's a manageable problem, right? We can always work around that. But really what the main, so the other thing it will do is, it's just, we were kind of saying well, what we'll do is we'll just run it on probably just went on the 5.0 branch versus just the 4 branch, and just let that linger along. Of course, then the problem comes, well, if 4.0 branch exists along 5.0, how easy will it be to actually merge changes from 4 into 5? Because even changing the lines will be nope, it conflicts, because the files are so different, because of the semicolons being missing is the real big difference. So I don't know if we really came to a true resolution on that. I mean, it pretty much says that it'd probably have to be done to the 4.0 branch, /master, just because of the fact that if not, if only done to 5, it's going to make it very difficult to run both branches side by side, just because anything that we add to 4 will be a pain in the butt to put in 5, because it will be a manual merge every time. So really, I guess that was right around the era of the current, was it 4.13 or 4.14? So right at the era of 4.14. So it didn't quite make like 4.14. So typically, if you really, really, really read into like the Semver stuff, like doing things that potentially like look crazy disruptive, even if they're benign, like reformatting, they recommend potentially doing it in a non-patch version, just because that makes it easier for people to do diffs and figure out what changed in the patch, so you can tell how patchy the patch was, especially if you wanted to backport that patch to some other version in your own internal. So we didn't quite do it, but yeah. So I mean, we'll probably do it at some point. I didn't actually think about the examples though, because especially without there's no PRs right now for the into examples, I don't think, like for code. So actually, we could just go ahead and probably put some rules in there to go check standard style against at least the examples directory, and then we can probably just run it against the examples at least. Could be certainly done at any time. Examples aren't code; they're not published not published part of the repo and stuff like that. So it's actually should be very undisruptive, just in general. So I think that's probably a good takeaway. Now I'm thinking about that. Of course, downsides are it'll look different, right? The examples will be in a different style than the main one, but arguably the examples and stuff aren't always quite in exactly the same style anyway, since there was no style enforcement, and there are slightly different preferences between like spacing of where the parentheses go and some other weird things like that. So it could certainly, the examples could certainly use a cleanup anyways. Some of them were contributed by other people, which is, somewhat whatever code style as well. So probably examples could be a good one to start with. Tests are probably could be another one, and I mean we'll have to figure it out. But yeah. I think that otherwise, as far as that actual PR goes, is yes. So we are, as an organization or as a team, we talked about standards code style quite a while ago, and we basically said, yeah, we'll just do standard because it just seems to be one of the main players, I guess, and part of it is no nonsense, just we're not going to change shit around, so which is kind of nice because then we don't have to think about it as much. So of course, you could say anything. I mean, this kind of goes, I mean, to me, the changing the docs to standard is similar a line of, should we make docs in ES6? I'm sure you remember those issues every so often. Yeah, whatever, because that's another whole thing. We won't talk about that here, but the reason I bring that up is because it's kind of similar, right? It's like basically, which style should the docs be? Should they be in the style that people will be looking for when they read them? Or should they be in the source style of Express, right? So if the argument is source style of Express, of course, then it means no, definitely not EX6, because there's no roadmap for Express source to be ES6 at this time. But then at the same time, of course, you could argue that new people might be put off by not having the semicolons and stuff, which, of course, the docs, I would argue, would be more new people would look at compared to the actual source code Express. I'm sure there's a lot of people, though, looking at that just new to JavaScript anyways. But, of course, probably quite a bit more would be looking at the actual docs. That's why we always get, it seems like every so often, an ES6 change to docs kind of pops up, while you don't see that with the Express source itself. Though we get a couple of times, we'll get that, I'm like a researcher or whatever, and I think that you should change these to ES6 classes. I have identified 3 classes and change it. we've literally gotten at least 2 of those, and so there must be something that they're like, it's causing them to create this. It's exactly the same. I have identified these 3 things that could be it's so they're eerily similar. It's weird.
That's funny.
But
well,
yeah, so I don't know.
I guess I'm not quite sure whether we should merge this PR or if we should wait till the examples at least are changed to follow the style, or if, as you say, since the repo doesn't follow it, that, does it even make sense? I'm kind of on the fence. I don't really have a strong feeling one way or the other. It's just, I'm just not quite sure what to do with it.
Right. I mean, I would basically say, I don't see any reason why we shouldn't. If you're on the fence because you don't feel comfortable with the amount of changes, I mean, we could always say, hey, Linus, could you split up could you like split the PR into like several different instances, to help make it, easier to at least just look over, like I said, especially because it was, as you see, it was hard to even see that those semicolons were missing from English words. So it's like, because he put also standard for just the actual JavaScript code itself in the repo, ignoring the readmes. So like you could say, well, we could split it up somehow. It doesn't have to necessarily be PRs, maybe just different commits to look at it, Oh, well, we'll put standard for the actual JavaScript code in the repo, and then maybe we'll just do the guides and then the API docs, or I don't know, whatever. If you think that might make it more comfortable or not, because I mean, I have the same kind of like thoughts, just for other repos too, because it's really hard and it's kind of like almost like paralyzing to see a review that changes so much stuff.
Yeah.
Because it's like, well, I'm pretty much just blindly merging this at this point.
Right. And there, now that I look more closely at it, he made a few other changes that, anyway, we don't have to go into all the details, but he actually changed some of the actual code, which it's kind of like, okay, well, I don't necessarily object to that, but it's just kind of weird to mix that in. Like he was just doing some cleanup or something.
Right. And that's why I said, so if one of the reasons why you're hesitant wasn't necessarily because it was standard, if it's also just because, it's just such a big thing to look at, like, I think it's, especially within our own org, I mean, it's absolutely reasonable to ask to split it up or something. I mean, even when I do my own commits myself, I usually try to split them up into really targeted sections. I mean, just as a general hygiene thing, I like to also, split things up on here. I'm like, if it's true, if he really did just do some cleanup just because, and it wasn't like some standard thing, because I don't know the specific example, but like, it could, like, I personally usually just split that up myself, and even when I'm doing my own code into different commits, because I'll be like, yes, I'm changing this fragment, making it maybe a little better, and then it's like, and this I am linting it or something, or I'm changing the standard really on this one, for example, which makes it easier to also figure out what broke. I mean, docs kind of, not as important, of course, in docs as it is in actual code to figure out when something broke a lot of times, but certainly eases any kind of burden of review. And like, if like the hesitation is review too, you can, I mean, I think if you want to ask that, or if you want to, say, hey, if like myself or Yappa wants to like comb through it as well, I mean, we can certainly do that as well. I didn't really comb through it too much, I know, because you seem to come through them pretty well, and usually it's only if I have some specific thoughts on it. Like, I commented on that one guy with you with the wording of that installing the generator. So
yeah. All right. Well, yeah, I'll go ahead and look at it a little more closely, and maybe ask him to split it, or just and certainly, yeah, I'll see if I can pick out the places where The semicolons in English text got deleted by mistake, because that's not going to work. And yeah, all right. I'll comment on it, and feel free if you want to go ahead and comment as well. I don't know, either of you, if you have any, if you're interested in diving into it or not.
Yep. Cool.
Okay. That's about all that I have today.
So, yeah, but did you have anything? I know that there is that one issue with the matched routes. I mean, like, I think the discussion is going on in there fairly enough anyways, but I didn't know if you wanted to mention that or something else.
Yeah, I think the feature what those guys are suggesting, that the API that feel like we should come up with is going to be pretty complicated. That's what I feel. What's your opinion?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think it's complicated. I think there's my concern is there's a lot of nuances to it. And kind of, it's hard, because the hardest thing I think about PRs, which I think has been the theme with this exact thing, because I mean, there's been multiple PRs with it, is here is a PR that just happens to work for my use case and my app design.
Right.
So that's the important aspect is and my app design. So not even my use case, it actually just only even works for my use case and app design. So for example, like like in this one, the most recent one, which I think the goal of it was to essentially log the route, I guess, that it hit. And as far as I can tell from the initial examples, is the route that wanted to log was that if you have like a /user/:ID route, for example, that they want to log that it's /user/:ID, not /user/1/user/2, so they can combine them. So of course, just on that very example that was provided, the PR doesn't even function correctly. One, as because if you think of all the app.use at the top, so a lot of people think app.use is just app.use, right?
Yeah,
but really, there's an implied slash, so that's why you get all those slashes. But you might have an app.use, 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 app.use /user. So like the way it is right now, there'd be like, you wouldn't have a way, and it could even say /app.use/:token, right? And just does anything with any token at the front. So then when that route ends up getting called, its matched routes will consist of like /////user//:token /user/:ID. And like, you can't tell the difference of what was just linear and what was like depth, I guess you could say. Like, you can't tell if one was actually a parent versus a sibling. So that's certainly lost there. So like, and that's all solvable. We just got to think about it, and it's hard for us to necessarily think about it if we don't really understand exactly what is being solved here. But yeah, so that's what my thoughts are on that. It's not super complicated. It's very nuanced, and is very there's a lot of edge cases that usually aren't addressed, of course, because like the common one, of course, is regular expression paths and arrays of paths. I mean, so and the idea is, I understand that what they propose happens to work for their use case and their app design, right? Absolutely.
Yep.
I do not disagree with that in any way. The hardest part for this kind of thing is, especially because it's essentially can communicate between routers, as in it would just include whatever in the parent. And that makes it, because today, I mean, routers they don't actually understand who's on top of them and who's not, right? So like, and you can actually use different versions with each other in the same app, which I've seen plenty of times. especially when you have one middleware or something that depends on Express like 4.10, and then your thing depends on Express 4.14, and that thing only uses Express.router, but then you're using your router and it's used, and like, for example, just simple matched routes, it would whatever the old versions would do would be invisible to it. Is that necessarily a problem or not? And that may be not a problem, but worse than just being invisible is that the format would randomly change. So that's all. So it's not like trying to, of course, people may think it's not trying to like block or anything. We're not trying to be a blocker. It's just, with the way it works, it's just certainly could end up in a situation where you have like dot matched routes, dot matched routes 2, dot the real matched routes. Who knows what. And all really we're just trying to do is just kind of like work through just figuring out what the use case is, because essentially you can think of this as people, it says, hey, I want to be able to do X or Y, right? So here's my solution. So it's like, cool. How does it usually, it almost sometimes sounds like, how does it work for this? Well, I really don't care because this is not literal, but I'm just saying like just general how it ends up kind of going. It's like, well, it doesn't really matter kind of thing to me because it doesn't affect me. It's like, yeah, but this is the general we're just trying to make sure that it's a general purpose API that when we, it'll work for whatever we're trying to make it work for. So with today's world, right, you can, all of this is all user mode, right? The user even like said they could put a middleware at the top that would basically do what they did, but it's a little different as well. I know that personally, of course, I have some apps that do the same type of thing, right? So they achieve it different ways, of course, and I haven't really run into problems. So some are shallow, literally they don't have subrouters, right? So thus things like rec.route works for them. Some do in fact, most all of them, because anything usually ends up getting really complex really fast. You end up, on all of my apps, I don't interact directly with the Express API usually. It's usually have like a framework wrapper above it. So it turns into one of the examples that he kind of showed, where he like showed a function calling and like passing the path there. Though of course the reason he had it duplicated was because it wasn't fully abstracted away to actually have whatever the helper method is actually calling the app.get as in addition to just the logging thing as well. There's all kinds of things you can do or not do, and it is definitely nuance there about what exactly. So it's all, and like I said, the discussion is certainly ongoing. There's nothing, I think it's going perfectly fine right now. And I would absolutely, it's just like, what I like to say, it's like, I don't know, it's like, regardless of what you think, it's not closed because we're genuinely interested in solving this somehow. So like other ideas are just, that have floated by me for a while, though it'd be a semi-large change and it should be worth it. And I was thinking about it from the tracing. Is like, someone could say, well, why isn't the Express app or router just an event emitter, and every time it matches a route, right, emits an event that it matched a route, and then someone can attach a listener and go collect it themselves or something. Of course, that's more code that they have to write, or some other library that they have to use or something. I don't know. And that's exactly why we're trying to just figure it out, really. Certainly if someone gives me a pull request, I look at them seriously. And then like, if I see one that's like, man, that seems like a very good solution to the problem. It's like, yeah, of course we would accept it and whatever. And, so it's just, yeah. And I would actually love that person Because if I could see this request finally go away, I'd be like, yes. And I haven't given it too much crazy thought, which is, not very super helpful either. I just trying to get a bunch of other stuff in there throughout the orgs. I need to actually take a closer look at the HBS repo too, though it's being held up currently. So lots of things. One thing, of course, at least for me, when it usually becomes in the winter, I have lots of extra free time than normal. So we'll see.
And Doug, what about the potential overhead of making the routes an event emitter?
Sorry, what was that?
Yeah.
Make the routes what?
Yeah. If you make the routes an event emitter, what would be the potential overhead?
Event emitter.
Yeah.
Oh, I thought you said integer. Sorry. Yes. So there will be overhead. So if you just so there's a couple approaches you could do to it, right? You could just blindly emit the event on every single thing, whether or not, regardless of if there's listeners. So that would have probably the most overhead. Of course, it's the simplest solution. You could do something like every time you could check if there are listeners on that. So newer nodes, like I think starting with 010, no, maybe 012, something they have the actual that static method event emitter dot listener count. That is actually at pretty much as fast as you can get that value back.
Right.
So you could use that API to check, and then emit only if you need to. That would be the second easiest and faster. I mean, and of course the fastest would be you'd only check at the beginning when that router sees it, and then I guess you'd have to add a flag somewhere on that request or object or something, and then when that flag is, just check the flag, and if the flag is set, don't emit it, otherwise do. But then of course, now I think about that, it gets complicated when you're going in and out of sub routers and stuff. Of course, the other reason I haven't really thought about too far yet either is because it does, to be honest, right, regardless of any performance or whatever, and how complicated it would be for us, it would actually mean if you have a flat router, right, then rectile route is already easy enough, and doing this would be easy. So I don't see the real benefit, right? Just like this person says, like, I think the real benefit of the reason people want this is because they have at least one sub router. So as soon as you start introducing sub routers, certainly it's like, wait, so how do I attach my event listener to all the routers? And like, it's like, then you get the questions of like, should the events act more like DOM events, right, and bubble up their apps or not? And so it certainly would be a lot to work out on just that, which truthfully I think that will have to happen at some point for any kind of real tracing stuff anyways. So they could certainly piggyback it off, because if you think about tracing, right, if you have an event that's emitted whenever a route is matched, that's technically tracing, right? Because I mean, you're just tracing where the request is going. So, and you can certainly do logs off that. And of course, a solution for, and that's why the use case is important, right? So like you'd want to understand not only what route is hit, but essentially what depth it is. So when you're going in, basically when you're going in and out of routers, I mean, it's very much like how you would usually see like a SAX or event-based like JSON parser, for example. You get like, start array, end array, or, new key, new value for that. And you have to just remember that there was a key, and, it's difficult to program against, which is what makes it annoying. And of course, that'll be the trade-off, right? Because if we make something too complicated to program against and then no one programs against it, there's just kind of headache for us to maintain as well. But that's why we're trying to figure out exactly what we want to solve. So if we can't, and I'm not trying, and I don't care if we solve all use cases or not, but I just want to make sure that we at least solve some concrete use case in a way where someone says, I'm using Express and I can use this, rather than saying, I'm using Express and I'm constructing my app a very specific way with Express. And then I can finally use it. And I think it's absolutely fair to say if we really, really want to, right? We haven't so far, but I mean, it could. I just want to make sure that we also are just thinking also, kind of like out of the box as well. Just no cards off the table. If there really is a good play for it, it's like, we could very well then say, well, if we're going to do this, we will no longer allow you to do regular expressions for your paths. You can only use the string, and it will only go through our interpreter, right? It's a classic trade-off of, a lot of times, like, you have to make that trade-off sometimes to provide some kind of information. You have to introduce a restriction to actually make that information useful in some kind of way. I mean, and I'm not saying we would do that necessarily. I'm just saying, like, certainly that's not technically off the table, right? Like, it would certainly, if we really do want to go down that route, that would be a big change. We certainly want to make for sure the trade-off is worth it. It's like, is it worth it to remove this functionality to introduce this other functionality? And then, of course, one could then say, well, is it possible we can have both somehow through different modules, right? There's lots of modules. We have Express.js, Pillar.js, JS-HTTP, all on NPM. So we could always even start publishing modules and stuff under NPM namespaces rather than global modules. So, I mean, we essentially have absolutely unlimited potential module space that we can utilize. So certainly, I mean, if we go down, like, you just got to include a different module for the different types or something, we could always do. So we'll just have to think about it. Yeah. Cool. Yeah, do you have any thoughts on it as well, or not really?
Yeah, and I was wondering if we could have router.mountPath, like how we have for sub apps.
I'm truly sorry. I was listening at first, and then for some reason I stopped. Can you just repeat?
All right, okay. Like how we have subapp.mountPath.
Yeah.
If an app is, yeah. So similarly, we could have the mountPath for routers.
Yeah.
What do you say?
I mean, we could. So part of that is probably we also probably need to sit down and say, because the reason why we don't have it for routers, right, could be, is of course the question is, what is the difference between apps and routers, right? Because if we just because you've probably seen this a few times, right? Like, usually people will be like, oh, well, I want the router to be able to do this. It's like, well, why aren't you using a sub app for that? Because that's what the difference is. So I think also, like, probably we just have to sit down and, like, say what the difference is, right? Because if we end up cherry picking everything that an app does into a router, then we've just turned a router into an app at that point.
Right.
So, but it's not just an exercise for answering this question either. I think that it would truly be useful information for other people as well. And there's a lot of, so even today, it's not a very clean separation. It's kind of a little weird as well because it was kind of organically separated. So there's a room, especially if we start thinking about what truly is a difference. I'm sure we'll see some weird edges that we might either need to add something to the app or remove something from the router, or even vice versa, right? Add something to the router, remove something from the app, just to better fit it. certainly all good opportunities for even like Express 5, since it's, you know, still kind of pending due to just something major like promise space stuff, which, yeah, in fact, I have a whole bunch of thoughts there, though I don't want to get into them tonight anyways, just because we don't want to stay here forever. So yeah, I think we'll probably end this was probably the last topic for tonight. So I don't know if you have any other
That's
things.
it for today. Yeah.
Cool. Well, one thing I thought of, and because I haven't seen you guys for a while, I don't know if either of you are going to be able to attend the Node.js Interactive North America in Austin this year.
Yeah, I'll be speaking.
Cool, because yes,
Wow.
I will be there as well. So
Great.
So yeah, that'll be cool.
Yeah.
I did go to the one in Amsterdam, and that was kind of, I mean, it was a lot less people, of course. You know, a lot of European people. So, but you know, of course, there was a bunch of people there from like Node.js and some other stuff, which is cool to meet in person. Of course, it's always nice to meet people in person. You know, just like kind of like here on our chat, right? It kind of like, you know, helps humanize people.
Yeah.
You know, it can be, you know, it's hard to humanize other people on the internet when you're just talking with like chat and looking at these fake avatars, you know. So it's always awesome to do that, you know, and discuss whatever. So I'm looking forward to hopefully meeting that much more people I've seen on the Node tubes at the North America one, since I know that, you know, of course, a lot of the folks are based in North America for whatever reason.
Yeah, should be fun.
So, yeah, otherwise, I mean, we always meet on here, so it's cool too, but cool. Awesome. Well, I think that'll probably wrap us up for tonight. So,
okay.
All right, well, have a good evening/day.
All right. Thanks, Ted.
Thanks, guys. Have a great evening.
Bye, Yappa.
Bye.
Bye-bye.